Gauze in the Wind by Bodhi. A break in the clouds, but the one thread runs through. For now, let's call it gauze in the wind. Surely we can say it's thin, torn easily by the moon. A sign of the coming year, of shedding old skin, an intuition. The record will resume on the other side of this invisible line. In my bones, the sharp points of the moon. In my bones, the sharp points of the moon.
Okay, so today we have Bodhi to talk about poetry, about haiku, and about his Zen practice, how all of these things tie together. He's a really interesting poet in Substack. He has a mixture of photography with his, I guess, like a journaling through his Zen experience, and he connects it with his haiku poetry. And so I'm really excited to have him on. And so could you introduce yourself?
Thank you. Yeah, I think you summarized everything very well. I guess I could add that I have been practicing Zen and writing haiku for about 8 years now. So I'm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, America, and that's me.
Okay, so how did you come into Zen? And I guess it might be tied very closely to haiku. Did these things come together for you, or did one lead to the other?
Yeah, they pretty much coincided. This is a heavy question. I wasn't prepared for it, but so there was a summer when my grandmother passed away, and that led me to leaving the state, traveling in my car, and then coincidentally, I met my Zen teacher maybe a month later, and so his advice was to start going out, walking, being in nature. So. Um, yeah, it all really came together at the same time.
Okay, okay, that's interesting. So because part of the, I guess, the origins of haiku from Basho, they're very tied to this idea of like wandering and traveling, and I guess that was before very tied itself to nature. You know, like if you're going through roads and stuff, they didn't really have like these huge highways, and you weren't stuck in cars. It meant like walking around and through basically the fields, the open fields, the mountains. You know, all these sort of things. So I guess did this like experience of start of like walking, you know, like I guess wandering through nature, did that open you to I guess the poetical sensibility?
Yeah, it did. Um, it's hard not to when you're surrounded by mountains and the ocean. So for where I'm from, we don't have mountains, so it's overwhelming, and so it's kind of hard not to write a poem about that. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I don't know, like I wish it were like that, you know, like there's a lot of people that even though they live in like very natural environments, they don't really care that much about it, you know. It's funny what makes one to be receptive to those kind of things, and I guess that's what might tie it perhaps also to a certain like a spiritual development, a certain like a spiritual awareness that makes you receptive to it. Because like even for me, that like I'm very interested like in, I guess, in nature and in poetry, but like it's something like the sensibility and the things you can perceive is that sometimes fluctuates, and it's very interesting to see when things might start kind of speaking to you, right? So um in terms of this like initial development you had, was there a specific moment where either through an experience you decided you wanted to start doing poetry, or was it more like by starting to maybe read haiku or another kind of literature, I guess?
Yeah, it's a tough question. What makes, nature sing to one person and not another. So I grew up playing in bands. I was the vocalist, so I wrote lyrics and I read a lot, novels and things like that. So the word has always, attracted me. So that part of it sort of unfolded in the direction of haiku. It was just a sort of an avenue to express these experiences succinctly. I can't say if there was an exact moment, but I think back to that moment when my grandmother passed away. I mean, there was something profound in the discussion between us, um, just about living a full life. So that made me go and try to see, what makes a full life, going deeply into it.
So um so was it like then like through wanting to learn more about Zen that you started becoming aware of haiku?
Um, I suppose so. Yeah, Zen came first, but also I think early in my 20s I came across um, Jiddu Krishnamurti, and again, it's hard to say like what I was being pulled towards, but I was looking for something, and I found his books and I read all of them. And then along the way, there's Alan Watts and these kinds of people came into it. Um, so for many years, I was reading about these things, but I wasn't practicing yet. Um, and then coincidentally, earlier in the year before my grandmother passed, I found it's called Japanese Death Poems. Forget the author right now, but there was something so striking about that type of writing that resonated with me. And so I carried that book around with me through the summer, and then that happened with my grandma, and it was sort of like this experience. And that was actually the first haiku I wrote was a death poem for her. So yeah, and then I was off, and then I met my teacher and started actually practicing, and it just sort of took on a life of its own.
Yeah, and yeah, it's very interesting, like the relationship, I guess, or I guess, or more, or to put it more succinctly, like I guess what makes like death poems so special, at least for me, is that it kind of reveals the importance that they give to poetry, right, in Japan, where you're willing to focus the last moments of your life sometimes in this poetical exercise, right? Because I guess right now in the West, we don't have that great an opinion of poetry, and it's like on the opposite end of the spectrum of like relevance, whether culturally or sometimes in personal life. So the dead poem to me reflects like the seriousness which with which they take it, because and part of what I really like about haiku is that it's usually very tied to spirituality. Some people have said that it's inherently Zen. I probably wouldn't necessarily go that route completely, but what have been your experiences between how is haiku part of your like whether specifically your Zen practice or your spiritual practice in general?
Well, I agree that haiku is not necessarily Zen all the time, but if you see through that lens, you can get that flavor. Um, but to me, it's a sort of um, it's an extension of Zen practice because you're slowing down, you're contemplating, um, it's just an extension of self-reflection. So to me, that is how they're similar. The Japanese have a saying that, and maybe this is what you're alluding to, that Zen and poetry have the same flavor. And so if you're describing Zen per se or nature in general, they have this sort of similar flavor. So,
Yeah, and I guess um well, of course there's gonna be also like like as a poetical expression of Japan is gonna be very influenced by the overall culture. So Zen is of course gonna play a role, and but like but also in my opinion, like like a lot of other things, like Shinto um and of course they have like a very developed poetical tradition itself, right? So like the origins of haiku weren't really that I would say spiritually minded, like you had like a really cool post recently. You made like a renga with two other haiku poets, which is a really cool exercise. And this was like mainly the origin of where the haiku comes from, which was more like a sort of like a poetical game played between many people. And it also followed very strict poetical rules, and also was very playful in a way. So it wasn't as necessarily serious as the thing it became after Basho. But it's really interesting that afterwards it also became almost its own sort of like form of a spiritual practice. There were people who tried to imitate the life of Basho and became like the wandering haiku poets. and he had like disciples. It was like it was really almost like a new school of spirituality, and and um, and that's really interesting to me because like in the West we have the we would think something like that very strange, right? Like a form of, if it would be like thinking about sonnets, like a spiritual practice, right? Like it would sound really strange, and we've lost really that dimension that poetry used to have, that was really almost inseparable from um, spirituality, religion. All these things were very tied together. Things like the druids or the bards, or they were considered almost like the like poetry was almost like the way of maintaining culture alive, and the myths and the rituals and a lot of things. And that's something that in the West as has almost been completely lost. And I think it's that also ties together to why poetry has kind of dwindled away from relevance in society, because it has lost that place, that connection um, to the transcendental, really. And that's why I think haiku is so important today, as something to study, I guess, at least, if not to practice, just to try to access that sort of those aspects of poetry, right? Um, so I don't know, like, just to throw it back to you, like, has what are your opinions of like the impact of poetry, and you can like tie it to haiku specifically, or the role it could have, or the way, the relationship you see between it and culture in general.
Well, I must admit, I'm one of those people that you could say imitates the life of Basho. Super inspired by just what he was doing. If he was around right now, I'd be his disciple for sure. And I think, yeah, about this tradition, you know, it's it's as if this whole thing is one long conversation we're having. You know about Kigo, the season words and these borrowed phrases, and so there's sort of allusions to one another. It's kind of like Renga, it's sort of woven all the way back into itself, which I love. And there's so much to discover, whether you practice it or not, just to study it and see how rich these short poems can be and what's going on behind them. So, um, I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah, yeah.
It's okay. Yeah, we like it's interesting. Like haiku has like a kind of very strange standing right now, I guess, in worldwide, because it has become incredibly popular, but at the same time, very few people seem to really know much about it. I think there's many reasons, but like definitely this idea that it's like a very easy, I guess, at least how they teach it, like metric pattern makes it like a very popular to like teach in schools, like maybe in primary education, to get like start like teaching kids like how to write poetry, or so because it's been taken almost as this kind of like didactic tool, and mostly focused on like the 5/7 like 575 metric structure, this kind of form has become like what most people would think about like a haiku. And when in reality, it's way more complex. And yeah, like part of the things that sometimes is misunderstood is things like the kigo and like the seasonal word, which ties into like another conception that's very popular, I guess, which is like that like haikus are like descriptions of nature, like mere descriptions of nature, right? So like or realistic in a sense. And I think part of the problem with this kind of things is what we, I guess, understand as nature, as a concept in the West, versus like what the relationship to nature is in like Japan, right? So like in the West, we really don't have a very sophisticated way of thinking about nature. Is mostly we think about it in like materialistic biological terms, and like the purpose of maybe doing a haiku is just like maybe showing how pretty like a sunset is, right? Like just but like the for me like this is like thinking that nature and our relationship with it is something that is readily like translatable, when in Japan, whether it was through poetical conventions that used to mean a lot more, like in the kigos, which are like the season words, which are things that are in Japan identifiable with a particular season. So you could have things like the like the blossoms of the sakura tree of the, which would be tied to spring. And this is like a big event in Japan, right? Like so, and because they live in an island, they're more or less they can be more or less shared, right? Like and so we have, of course, that like natural aspect, but then we have like the conventions of what things mean. And for example, you could have like the dragonfly related to courage in the samurais, because it always kind of like goes straight and never backs down, and at the same time tied to more to I guess sunset, or like I guess autumn too, but I might not be remembering correctly. But these are all like a rich poetical tradition of like understanding them also as symbols. So it's not like if you translate a poem about a dragonfly, it's not gonna have the same relation, like if you just do it like I guess literally, it's not gonna have like the same meaning that it would have to the Japanese. So exactly the same thing as if we would maybe translate things like the olive branch, or like the dove, like symbols like from Christianity or Roman mythology and culture, which have like poetical traditions of meaning way more than just like the plain ethereal thing. And finally, we have like also Shinto, which is the more like animistic tradition, which consider, well, which adds that mystique to nature. Like you can have like kamis or spirits in a river, or in a special rock, or in a tree, or anything. So all of these things make a way more complex understanding of nature than what we would think from I guess like the conceptions we've had from what is thought as haiku, as nature description poems, that are not, that are kind of materialistic. So what are your thoughts about this concept of nature? Because independently of if haiku can deal with other subjects, and nature is of primary concern. So it's one of those things that are very relevant, I guess.
Yeah. So much to unpack there. And, I'm glad you brought all this up though, because hopefully some curious minds will hear this and because I think there's a lot of misconception. Um, on one hand, it's great that they teach haiku in grade school, things like that, but I'm not really sure where, or who started that, that tradition of grade school haiku lessons, but whoever brought that in, there was a misconception about the syllable count, because that's just one thing, like the cutting words that really isn't translatable into English. Um, Japanese words, they're more syllabic. They're you can, with 17 syllables in a Japanese poem, you're gonna get 4, 5, 6 words. But if you wanted to, you could make a 17 single syllable English haiku and it would just be too much. So I think, focusing on that element, um, it takes away from the spirit of it. And yeah, it seems to be a sort of exercise, like a light, and it is light in a certain sense, but sort of um, an unserious, sort of just a description of a nice sunset or something. And sunsets can be profound. But you know, I always say, if people are interested in haiku, any single book written on the topic by any of the commentators and translators out there will break down the history and point out all these things that I'm saying right now. And so it seems to me that a lot of people that practice haiku haven't looked into it very deeply at all. Um, and there's different schools of thought, even in Japan, and it's evolved through the centuries. Um, uh, Shiki, and he was a big advocate for just saying what it is, which is nice, but even still, the way that he was doing it was very um, symbolic and sort of choppy in a way, in little fragments. Um, and I like him. I like that style. I love Busan, who he, you know, was a huge fan of. And but I again love Basho. I think what he was doing was something where, just on the surface level, it was something about nature, and you could take it just like that. But there seemed to always be at least one or two more meanings in there. Um, so yeah, they can be complex and they are deceptively simple. Um, so yeah, I forget if I answered your question yet again, but yeah, yeah, there's just so much to say about it all.
Yeah, it's a big topic, and yeah, more, as you said, like way more complex than what people realize. And it is deceptively complex because even though based on the simple rules, it is something that it's relatively easy to accomplish, because even though it's always gonna be like a short poem, right? But just like really getting to write like a great poem, like a great haiku, is really hard. And precisely because it's so short. So it's interesting that that's both the reason of it maybe uh, seeming more easy, but it's also when you start doing it, you realize it's way more complex because the shorter it is, the more relevance each word takes. So, like I've had, like you can work on poems just changing like one word and it'll change completely the meaning of it. And sometimes like at least in my writing, like I'll go through like 100 iterations of the poem, just to get towards the one that that really clicks. So this is like what is also so interesting is it's so easy, I guess, to start, but so hard to really master, right? Like it really pushes you to consider each word and to its full extent, and that's why it's also so special, like in terms of its shortness. It's as close, when you read like a really great haiku, it gets to a point where it seems absolutely almost perfect, right? Like because like that it could have no other alternative, right? Like which the longer your poem is, like in other kinds of formats, the less relevance like each thing has. You can maybe like switch a synonym for another and it wouldn't matter that much. But like in a really great haiku, there's like everything, nothing can be changed without like really altering it.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, there's, if you don't consider things like the syllable and you instead focus on, how concise can you make it, and it, yeah, it's always coming toward this point where it could not be any different, where it's found its perfect expression. Yeah, most of them that I write are at least 50 different times, 100 times. Um, and it just seems to sort of balance perfectly, just be like a singularity, So, and yes, that is super hard. Again, back to Basho, I think he said, if you can write 10 true haiku, then you are a master. So it is, that's sort of what you're always aiming at with it. So,
Yeah, yeah, it's very interesting, like how like at the same time you can write so many, but like really getting just one that gets to that point really takes a lot of years of like practice, and maybe to turn a little bit like the conversation again, like a part of what it's also interesting about haiku, and coming back to kind of like the spiritual aspect, and maybe I can also tie it again a little bit to Zen, is that haiku, like at least one of the aspects that I like to emphasize the most is that what it also makes it special is that its purpose is like inherently like poetic, right? So and this might be like a vague word because in I guess Western poetry, like we have all kinds of different uses for poetry, right? Like so most of the things usually are very intellectual, right? So like whether it's something like I don't know, even like from things like the Iliad, which are kind of like foundational, these are still kind of like more narrative, philosophical, mythological. Like there's a big bent towards more of an intellectual experience, which is not completely intellectual. It's right? Like I'm not also trying to discount it like necessarily as tainted or worse poetry for it, but like in haiku, um you really don't um you really don't try to make things intellectual or have like an intellectual purpose. um you want like something that it's more like the pure poetic image, right? Like and at this level it's where it becomes more of a spiritual practice, both in terms of what means like the initial inspiration, which requires also like a receptivity that is more um, that is not intellectual, right? Like you cannot you have to be kind of like in a more receptive, more calm, more meditative like aspect, more contemplative aspect in order to get like these sort of impressions, messages from nature or from any other sort of aspect of life. And and once you're able to kind of like be quiet, I guess, enough to let that image like sink in and like kind of like flower, then you can start figuring how to understand it and replicate it. And so it is like in that sense, it really requires um, almost contradictory aspects of in order like to fully materialize. One is to become quiet and then like get the actual um, experience or image, and then you can start like figuring it out and like trying to use words and thinking how to actually manifest that idea, right? So I think that's one of the main aspects where it definitely is compatible with Zen in that quieting that requires that serenity, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to make it sound like, when you write 50 iterations of a poem, it's not an intellectual exercise. It is it's intuitive. You're feeling, is this the right word? And then suddenly it pops up. And so like, yes, first of all, you open yourself, you quiet yourself, something hits you and moves you. And for one reason or another, the thinking mind comes back and says, I want to share that. I want to honor that. And so it's there as a sort of helper. It says, I have these words. What about that word? And you're sort of touching back with your intuition the whole time and, in a way, like trying to sort of replicate nature by honoring it. So yes, this is the way that I take it. This is how it is a spiritual practice for me.
Yeah, it's again like in poetry, I guess it's something that is really valuable, I guess, to practice, to understand, to um, those different aspects um, that one can inhabit, right? Like because like like maybe to use like an example, like as sometimes when you're like in poet mode and like writing mode, you'll see something beautiful and the mind will kind of jump into like, I'm gonna write it like this and I'm gonna use these words, and you miss the experience, right? Like so it's really interesting that you have to almost like go against your poetical mind uh, in order to like end up actually um, experiencing something beautiful. and then using like things that are still connected with intuition and feeling, but which also like bring in that more intellectual aspect of study, of knowledge, of craft, right? Like and yeah, like it's just do a little trick. How does it feel? Does that resound? And sometimes like really, and it's really interesting. Sometimes some like new things can come out from that process. You know, like actually when you get into that flow of contemplating just like from the words, then something sometimes unexpected can happen, and like a poem can take like a complete different route. Like it's sometimes very interesting how they might evolve and take different directions, right? Like from what we initially wanted it to. And so yeah, that's something that I think it's very important, I guess, for writers in general, you know, like because it's very easy to fall in kind of like this more pathological or more like the predatory mindset of like the artist like trying to extract beauty instead of like being able to calm down and receive it, and if something comes after, you know, it's okay or not. But you know, like that's certainly like a like a thing that it's like very key in like haiku, right? Like in because it requires like this tension between like yeah, becoming like developing a craft, but also being able to kind of like forget about it when you see like the moon or a flower or whatever it is, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's towing, real thin line. Yeah, I mean, you start by trying to empty yourself, and you come back and you want to honor that emptiness. And yes, there's like this movement that's in there that goes in its own natural way, and that itself is sort of like while you're trying to replicate and honor this one moment, that movement is nature. This special thing happens, and if you can reach that singularity, and then if it's read by another, it may transfer that pause to the other person. So yeah, it's a very there's a lot of movement underneath the surface, which is what I love about it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And it's just I guess um it's interesting that like for me like lacking this sort of relationship to nature, which really mostly manifests, I guess, through poetry, right? Like there's I think there is like a big connection between nature and language, and it's a form of like of learning almost that goes on, you know, of like learning through nature, which is not as mundane as it sounds. Like again, to you know, like um, come back to these ideas of nature that we have, um, like even in Christianity or like the roots of Western culture, it wasn't always necessarily like it is like in um maybe like for example from the Greeks and the Romans we still have that more animistic perspective of like kind of like the nymphs and like the uh, god rivers and stuff like that, which they still developed at least poetically all through our history and maybe kind of lost now. But also like in Christianity there, like at least in early Christianity, like in more like the monks and the like maybe monks from the desert and people like nature was considered almost like the like the third scripture of God, right? Like so like there was this sense of communication with the spiritual that was like very potent still, and that probably like like the our change in relationship like with nature, and like starting to see it more like in terms of mechanistic biology. I bet it probably like had a big role into the degeneration that then poetry started to have, and becoming more every time more like bent towards merely, I guess, irrational, and like in the awareness of the deep, of like the really deep development that one can have from engaging in this way with nature, right? Like, and that's like a way to also like well value or like a way to propose to regain that relationship with nature, because we have like the ecologists, and we have like a lot of notions about how to respect nature, but most of them are based in precisely materialistic means. We have to respect nature because otherwise the planet will end and we'll all die, or or even maybe more simpler things, just because like based on empathic reasons or stuff like that, like, and I don't really think that that these approaches work, because they're still kind of trapped in the same mentality that gave rise to having that opinion of nature. And until we regain a more profound, more transcendental view of nature, then we'll be able to really give it the value that it had, and then it I guess inherently was made for, without going more theologically, right? But like for you, through your practice, is there a way in which your relationship with nature has changed or evolved?
Well, like we said at the beginning, I don't know what it is that makes certain people tick about these kinds of things. Um, and when I was growing up, I was in bands that were like punk rock and things like that. And you could write about politics or whatever, but I always was writing about nature and sort of this disrespect, by humanity, and the sort of grief about that. I don't know where that came from. Um, but yeah, I think that general modern sort of attitude of nature is here to serve us somehow. And so we are, you know, putting our hands all over it, and that is a decline in itself, and that's the decline of like this poetic sensibility of honoring it. And so, I mean, I think more than ever, we need to return to that. Um, and so, this feeling is what makes me want to write these things. I hope that someone could be, struck by it and be turned around, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not. I I agree. Like, I think, yeah, it's um, I guess also like poetry, um, in that, like in a lot of the traditional cultural functions it served, like one of like one of them was, of course, like as an emotional language, right? Like when you wanted to express love or joy or sorrow, like this was one of the main tools for people to better express themselves and better, I guess, understand their emotions. but I think it's also, like another big thing was tying them towards their locality, towards the plants of the region, like towards the landmarks, I guess, the rivers, and understanding, I guess, or placing them in sort of like a tradition in a holistic way involved with the culture. So of course, like if you start losing poetry as a cultural aspect of life, then those aspects are gonna suffer. Like most people don't know the names of the plants, don't know the names of like the birds or the insects, or and that's just the basic things. They don't even know their characteristics or properties. Some people don't even know where their food comes from, or none of these things, that should be like very important in many ways. It will eventually also tie to health, right? Like if you don't know the properties of the plants and how they function, like you might be eating things that are not good for you, and so on. So yeah, just it's so central, this idea of like of really understanding nature, and even from those basic aspects of just how we relate to it, but then again to the more transcendental aspects that it can have. And yeah, I think like right now, like I do think that haiku is one of the best tools to get there, because even though like I guess in Western poetry we also have like a lot of nature poems. I think it's way more concentrated and specific in like haiku. It's like it has a very distilled essence of what it should be, or at least in these aspects, right?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think that, there's nothing wrong with longer poems, by any means, before I say this, but you know, we kind of said this before. I mean, every word counts, and it is so concentrated that instead of coming to an eventual point, it is just the point. So it really, if it works well, if it's done well, can just pierce right through you. So I would agree. Yeah, it's a great tool for, waking people up to things.
Yeah, and like for me, I'm also like not disparaging like any other forms of poetry. I just think it's a really important tool to, I guess, study from like the what we can like objectively call like the failed state of where we are in terms of like cultural poetics in like it like in the West, and like in a lot of parts of the world where uh, yeah, it eventually just took really like unfruitful pathways, I would say, right? Like especially in art, like it became almost this race of wit, and basically just became completely intellectual. And again, like I'm not necessarily saying that it's a matter of that all poetry should not be intellectual and kind of like haiku like. It's just it's more a matter of proper balancing, right? Like from, I guess, from my way of viewing things, is very based on balance, and learning to balance different aspects of our selves. And sometimes that's not really easy, like because those aspects are opposed to each other in a way, right? So like reason and the intellect, if unbalanced, will start discriminating against the other areas, right? Like we'll start disparaging faith or emotions or other aspects that are equally important, but from the point of view of reason, they are kind of opposed, right? Like so, of course, reason is never gonna want to be quiet. So, right. So if you start going down that route, then you start choking out like all of that, your sensibility, basically. Like that was like I guess like a big struggle for me. And like as someone who is very I guess intellectual, you know, like it has been like a really long process to learn how to balance like sensibility and receptivity with the intellect, because as I mentioned, it was like you know, like as a poet, like you'll and a writer in general, you'll have like an experience, and instead of like choosing to really take it in and like feel it completely, you'll start thinking about it and kind of like trying to dissect it, and like and after a while you start choking everything that comes, and that's really hard to step out of, right? Like and yeah, that's what, you know, like makes both that perspective of Zen like and haiku so important to understand that there are things that you have to how to step out of reason, right? Because like in the West, even when like a lot of philosophers or thinkers have become kind of aware of the problems of like reason by itself, and reason out of control, they still try to solve it through reason itself, right? So like you'll have like Wittgenstein, who had like this kind of like more spiritual mission, I guess, by writing like the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, right? Like how to solve the answers of philosophy, so that like I guess what he would call the mystic could appear. But he's, you know, like he still tried to do it like through reason, like as if you could convince reason to stop reasoning, which is kind of like it's kind of like the joke that the koans try to pull on you, right? Like, so you want to try to reason yourself out of reason, go ahead and then have this koan, right? Like, and that's I guess the way I see it, right? Like that you have to realize that that you have to develop and outside of it, not that you're not going to be able to just go through it, like to reason yourself out of reason, I guess.
Yeah. You know, all things in their proper place and balance. You know, if you want to write a long, sort of witty, intellectual, hey, there's a time and a place for that. And you know, let that discerning mind have its time to play from time to time. But it does get out of control. And so, you know, approaching, if you don't want to call it a spiritual path, if it's just your sort of artistic practice in this way, you're tempering it, and you're also discovering things about yourself. And it's this interesting thing where you're doing something by engaging in this practice, but you're you're not doing it from within. It's sort of, you just find yourself stepping out once in a while, and yeah, when you have an experience like that, then you just naturally sort of start returning to that balance, and it's sort of the balance manifests, So it's a tricky thing. It's definitely, not something you can just say, I'm going to do that. I'm going to go for that. But at the same time, you have to be concerned with that. And then some kind of magic happens, something mystical.
Yeah, yeah. It's hopefully something that I guess um also haiku can start giving glimpses of, right? Like, so that there's this interesting aspect of like a good haiku, that it kind of like surprises you and kind of like um quiets you, and it's um yeah, it's interesting things about how to use words to achieve that. And I guess you like generally that's, I think, one of the benefits of poetry, because by being like a word-based medium, and but like you're able to engage with that aspect of your mind, but but you're also using it in a way that it's unusual and new, and then it kind of like confuses the mind into, and in such a way that it opens new aspects, right? Like allows other parts of you to react, other than just like analytically go through each part of it and just like get it as information. Like a lot of the time, that's why like one of the main rules in most arts is kind of to avoid cliches, because those are things that are already kind of like the mind has already kind of processed and incorporated into like to that more like information aspect, right? So like if you're using cliches, then you're not really well, depending on the person, of course, but like generally your audience is going to be receiving it and like processing it basically just again as information.
Mhm.
And but and what you want to do is like not allow the mind, I guess, to to do that, and to like kind of like stretch it a little bit um, to reach forward towards those deeper layers of understanding. And and yeah, like that's like in that sense, I really like that kind of like almost like riddle aspect that that for me a lot of like good poetry has. And like and I like really finding it in haikus, right? Like something that is kind of so impactful and surprising, and you that it can makes you kind of like really contemplate into the reasons of why it is so, and this, which is like I guess the root also of why we want to write sometimes like things like haiku, right? We get something really mysterious and striking, like a and by trying to write it is our way of like really understanding it, right? So um yeah, I think that it's that it's a really good way to maintain, I guess, that a more healthy reason, like this exercises of constantly like stretching and like not cage things in, right? Like a due to the practical reasons of life, like we need to like go through like kind of knowing things, right? Like you go outside and that's Like I guess the orange tree, I can't. I have to like swerve my bike to go through it, etc. You know, like this recognition, pattern recognition, right? But if you're always stuck in that, then you start missing so much of the real richness of life, right? Like that because you call it an orange tree and you see it every day and you think you know what it is, right? Like until one morning unawares your bike breaks off and then you smell the blossoms, like the orange blossoms, and then you realize something way deeper, way richer, right? Like that that really acts that makes you access to that more profound layer of reality, I would say.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, again, it's a paradox because you know we have these rigid, you know, this recognition of, you know, orange tree, what have you, and you want to go beyond that, but then also this whole process is you're almost kind of constructing a koan for yourself and sort of, and so in a way, sort of giving it a challenge that constricts it, but then, you know, something just snaps. And yeah, I mean, it's all about slowing down and reevaluating what is really going on here. Um, yeah, I think that is the summary of haiku, the real heart of it.
Okay, and now maybe to like touch like another aspect that is very important, I guess, in the way you present your work, that I don't think we have yet talked about, which is like the photography, right? Like so that seems to also be like a very important part of I guess of what we could call your like artistic output. So how did that tie into to to those other aspects, I guess?
Well, yeah, I mean, it came about, you know, right around the same time. I took a photography class in high school, loved it, and then didn't really do anything with it for many years. Um, yeah, I mean, like when I went to California and started walking in the mountains and things, I mean, you couldn't help it, you know, if you had, you know, at first I was just using a phone camera, but you know, you just there's some, you know, you don't have to take a picture of it. You can take it in just as it is, but some part of you says, I don't want to forget that. And you know, so you just start taking some pictures of it. And I to me, a haiku is just, you know, a picture in words. I mean, they're almost the same thing, and so they can you can have one without the other. They could support each other and maybe even um, add something or even add some sort of mystery to just the words if you left them alone. So yeah.
Yeah, and like haiku also like a big like also tradition was like using it to or alongside with ink paintings and
Hmm.
another form of paintings in Japan. So it definitely always it has had that like a very pictorial aspect to it, and and yeah, like it's very integrated into, well, I guess because a lot of the art um, and artistic expressions like had similar sensibilities, right? Like um, so yeah, like yeah, photography is um, it's interesting, like how now we've become like way more visual since we are constantly like on screens. And yeah, like what I like about like the way you compose your post with like pictures and like the journaling of your same practice and like the haiku is that it helps to take all those aspects in a way more calm way, right? Like because it's very easy to see, like for maybe if it wasn't done that way and it was just like the picture and some other kind of text, like it would be way easier to just like take it in a second and kind of like as
Mm.
information again and like move on. So I guess like the mix of the different mediums really reinforces each other, right?
Mhm. Yeah, well, that's my intention. And so I guess it's coming across, which is great. Yeah, I mean, when you're in that moment, you see that mountain, you don't want to forget it. You take that picture. I mean, it's a window into that moment. And so I put that kind of picture with that moment and hope, try my best to achieve that singularity and you know, bring someone, the reader, into that moment, if possible, to show them that that kind of moment is possible. This is not just my personal experience, this is a human experience. So yeah, it's just a window into a type of life.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I don't know, I think we've covered a lot. Like I don't know if you have like any other topic you want to bring up or
No, I mean we've covered a lot. Any conversation like this can go on for a long time for those interested in it, but balance. So let's leave it there and reel this mind back in.
mm-hmm. Oh, okay, so well, for people who are not on Substack, that's where you can find Body, Flowers of Emptiness. I think you also have like a book called Cloudscape Record. I
Hmm.
don't know if you want to like give it any additional information of how people can reach you or find about your work.
Um, for now, Substack is the primary place. I kind of have a website under construction, so there's nothing to find there. I'm on Instagram too, but it's really the same images and a sort of um, duplicate of what's on Substack. If anyone's interested in this book, it was about a 2-month Zen training course, and I journaled about it every day for 50 days, and every day there's a haiku. No photos in it, but yeah, physical book. There's nowhere to buy it except to contact me. So if you are interested at all, um, please do. I'd love it.
Okay, there it is. Well, thank you very much for coming to talk. It was a great talk. Like it's always I love haiku, so it's always great to talk about it and in general just like I love getting the point of view of other poets, learning about their process, their work, and their goals, so thank you again.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure.
There it is.